Good afternoon, Grace Community Chapel. Hope you're doing well on this Friday. As we were talking today, me and Alyssa we're talking about how if you're new to Maine, that this is a fool's spring. This is that weather that you get that you're like, oh, it's spring, but it's a trick and it's a deceit and it's not really spring. But either way, excited to see some warmer weather today. It was nice to be out a little bit this morning and some warmer weather, so that was great. Hopefully you're enjoying it as well. As you can see on the screen behind me, or next to me, I should say, we are looking at Proverbs, and that's what we're going to be diving into. Actually, sorry, it's on this side of the screen, but we're going to be looking at Proverbs, and I figured we would take probably 30 some days or so. We'll just do a whole chapter of Proverbs and we'll read through it. We're probably not going to have enough time to talk about every single proverb in there. We'll probably just hit a couple of the ones that kind of stick out to me. And if there's one that sticks out to you, feel free to throw it in the chat and talk about it. But keep in mind, Proverbs is various authors potentially. King Solomon maybe have attributed most of it. It dates between the 10th and the 6th centuries BC, and it's a collection of wisdom. And talking about the pitfalls of life and the things that are the essence of wisdom. So we're going to, without any further ado, get right into Proverbs today. And we'll start looking at Proverbs chapter 1, and we'll read through the whole first chapter. Proverbs chapter 1, starting in verse 1, the Proverbs of Solomon, the son of David, king of Israel. To know wisdom and instruction, to understand the words of insight, to receive instruction in wise dealing, in righteousness, justice, and equity. To give prudence to the simple, knowledge and discretion to the youth. Let the wise hear and increase in learning, and the one who understands obtain guidance. To understand a proverb and a saying, the words of the wise and their riddles. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and instruction. Hear, my son, your father's instruction, and forsake not your mother's teaching, for they are a graceful garland for your head, and penance for your neck. My son, if sinners entice you, do not consent. If they say, come with us, let us lie and wait for blood, let us ambush the innocent without reason. Like Sheol, let us swallow them alive, like whole, like those who go down to the pit. For we shall find all precious goods, and we shall fill our houses with plunder. Throw in your lot among us, and we will all have one purse. My son, do not walk in the way with them. Hold back your foot from their paths. For their feet run to evil, and they make haste to shed blood. For in vain is a net spread in the sight of any bird. But these men lie in wait for their own blood, and they set an ambush for their own lives. Such are the ways of everyone who is greedy for unjust gain. It takes away the life of the one it possesses. Wisdom cries aloud in the street, and in the market she raises her voice. At the head of the noisy street she cries out, and at the entrance of the city gates she speaks. How long, O simple ones, will you love being simple? How long will scoffers delight in their scoffing, and fools hate knowledge? If you turn at my reproof, behold, I will pour out my spirit to you. I will make my words known to you. Because I have called and you have refused to listen, and I have stretched out my hand, and no one has heeded. Because you have ignored all of my counsel, and would have none of my reproof. I will also laugh at your calamity. I will mock when terror strikes you. When terror strikes you like a storm, and your calamity comes like a whirlwind, when distress and anguish come upon you, then they will call out to me, but I will not answer. They will seek me diligently, but not find me, because they hated knowledge and did not choose to fear the Lord. Would have none of my counsel, and desired all of my reproof, despised all of my proof. Therefore they shall eat the fruit of their way, and have their fill of their own devices. For the simple are killed by their turning away, and the complacency of fools destroys them. But whoever listens to me will dwell secure, and will be at ease without the dread of disaster. Well, there's certainly a lot that could be said in this section, and maybe there's something specifically that stuck out to you. Here's a couple things just in looking at the sections, the way that they're kind of broken up. Really and truly, the first 7 verses really give us a whole paradigm for how the whole book is going to be kind of gathered together. And the idea is that we want to know wisdom, know instruction, understand words of insight, to be able to deal wisely in justice, righteousness, and equity, to be able to have knowledge and discretion and give it to those who are youthful, and let the wise hear and increase in learning. That's part of it, and that the one who may understand would obtain guidance. So that way we know how to live our lives. It's interesting that in verse 7 it says, "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and instruction." That all the basis of the beginning of knowing something, and if you wanted to get into the more technical, the science of knowing, epistemology, the basis of epistemology is the fear of knowledge. And the fear of knowledge, the fear of the Lord. That is the basis of knowledge, and that's what we truly believe as Christians. That you can't really have true knowledge until you start with fearing God. So next we see the enticement of sinners and a father's instruction to his son. And what I think is so interesting is he tells him not to throw in his lot with him, even if there's an enticement of one purse. But he says ultimately these men lie in wait for their own blood, and they set up an ambush for their own lives. Because ultimately the person who's speaking, Solomon perhaps, most likely in this situation, is saying, look, as these men are seeking ill-gotten gain, as they're seeking things for greedy for themselves and taking away from someone that's maybe innocent, or taking away from someone in an unworthy way, that ultimately, that path is ultimately self-destruction. And ultimately that path, such are the ways of everyone who is greedy for unjust gain, it takes away the life of its possessors. And I think that's a generic truth, verse 19, that we can just be good to commit to memory. Such are the ways of everyone who is greedy for unjust gain. It takes away the life of its possessor. So we've got one verse, verse number 7, that would be really great to kind of commit to memory. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and instruction. And verse 19, such are the ways of everyone who's greedy for unjust gain. It takes away the life of its possessors. And then we've got this interesting verse 20 and following to the end of the chapter we read is a personification of wisdom. Wisdom becomes a person, and wisdom is out, and wisdom is crying in the streets and in the markets, and it's speaking loud, and it's providing its wisdom everywhere where voices can be found. And yet people do not listen to wisdom, and people do not turn when they hear it. And it can be loud and right in front of them, and they just don't hear it, and they don't listen to it, and they don't change their ways because of it. They ignore the counsel, they ignore reproof. And it's important to know that the I here is wisdom personified. Now, we certainly recognize that all wisdom is found in God, and God ultimately, if you were going to personify wisdom, you could say God in some ways, because He is from which all good things come. But it would not be fair to say that Proverbs chapter 1 is God speaking, and these are the things that God is saying. This is wisdom speaking, specifically wisdom personified. And when you're thinking about it that way, when you hear wisdom and you turn at wisdom's reproof, wisdom pours its spirit out to you, and it makes things known to you. So when you start turning to good counsel, that's what we see in verse 23, the path becomes more and more clear when you begin to secede to the way of wisdom. But yet there are many that refuse to listen to wisdom when wisdom calls, and when wisdom stretched out its hand, they ignore the counsel. They would not take the reproof. And in those times when we have heard the wisdom and we've ignored it, it's almost as if later on, when the circumstances that wisdom warned us about come to pass, wisdom almost mocks us. And I think in the times when I've been given good counsel and I've gone against good counsel, just a simple experience I had. It was a really snowy snowstorm, and I really wanted to go to a friend's house. I was 16. I thought I could take on the world. I was a good driver. And it was a really bad snowstorm, and I ended up going into a drift right off the road. And I remember calling my dad. It was probably the worst phone call I've ever had to make. Like, like, you were right. You told me not to go. right? But in that moment, not that my dad handled it with the utmost gracious and kindness and came out and got me, and it's okay, things happen. But in that moment, wisdom mocked me because I heard the wisdom of the things that my dad had told me before I left the house, and he was right, and he was right. And in a sense, it mocked me and it laughed at my calamity, because if I'd have just taken heed to wisdom, I wouldn't have had a problem. And so I think about that. They will call me, but I will not answer. They will seek me diligently, but they will not find me. That's not the Lord speaking. God's not going to. Now is the time of salvation. Anyone who calls, God will be found. Right now, there is a time where that may be true, but that's not in our experience now in the age of the church. Um, and then continuing on, therefore they shall eat the fruit of their own way. They shall have the fill of their own devices. Ultimately, it is true that if you do not heed wisdom, you do not follow wisdom, that is going to be the outcome. Simple are killed for their way of turning away, and the complacency of fools destroy him. But whoever listens to me will dwell secure and will be at ease without the dread of disaster. If we can heed wisdom, our lives will be better for it. One last thing I want to just note is that Proverbs are not a guarantee. Proverbs is not it. This is absolutely always going to be the way it'll be, no matter what. I think of a proverb that many of you may know: "Train up the child in the way they shall go, and they shall not depart from it." That's not a promise. That's not a guarantee. But it is a generic truth that will always usually ring true. There are times that doesn't come true, but it's a generic truth. So I think of verse 33. Whoever listens to me, listens to wisdom, will dwell secure and will be at ease without dread of disaster. That is true generically of listening to wisdom. So hopefully this has been some helpful. I love Proverbs. Looking forward to getting into this with all of you. Hope you guys have a great weekend. Look forward to getting into chapter 2 with you on Monday. And feel free to come out. And if you're new to the page or you're new to us, we'd love to see you on a Sunday morning. We start our church service at 10:30 and we have Sunday school at 9:15. We'd love to have you. God bless. Have a great weekend. Look forward to seeing you then. Bye. Good morning, Grace Community Chapel family. Hope you are all doing well on this Monday. Looks like we're looking out at some potential warmer weather coming up, and I'm excited by that. Maybe get rid of the rest of the snow, and maybe we won't see any more of it. Who knows? We'll see. Whatever God allows, right? So we're in Proverbs chapter 2 today, continuing through our study. We're going to try to see if we can get through the entire book of Proverbs in 31 days. That's how many Proverbs there are. Now, keep in mind, we don't do this Saturdays and Sundays, so it will take more than a month to do. But some really great wisdom, some really great content in the book of Proverbs. So let's get in to start reading Proverbs chapter 2, starting in verse 1. My son, if you receive my words and treasure up my commandments with you, making your ear attentive to wisdom and inclining your heart to understanding. Yes, if you call out for insight and raise your voice for understanding, if you seek it like silver and search for it like hidden treasures, then you will understand the fear of the Lord, and you will find the knowledge of God. For the Lord gives wisdom, from his mouth comes knowledge and understanding. He stores up sound wisdom for the upright, and he is a shield to those who walk in integrity, guarding the paths of justice and watching over the way of his saints. Then you will understand righteousness and justice and equity in every good path, for wisdom will come into your heart, and knowledge will be pleasant to your soul. Discretion will watch over you, understanding will guard you, and delivering you from the way of evil, from men of perverted speech, who forsake the paths of uprightness, to walk in the ways of darkness, who rejoice in the doing of evil, and delight in the perverseness of evil. Men whose paths are crooked, and who are devious in their ways. So you will be delivered from the forbidden woman, from the adulteress with her smooth words, who forsakes the companion of her youth, and forgets the covenant of her God. For her house sinks down into death, and her paths go to the departed. None who go to her come back, nor do they regain the paths of life. So you will walk in the way of the good, and keep the paths of the righteous. For the upright will inhabit the land, and those with integrity will remain in it. But the wicked will be cut off from the land, and the treacherous will be rooted out of it. So as we're looking at chapter 2 of Proverbs, this continues in a string of proverbs, and they're not individual proverbs like what we'll see maybe later on as we get through the book, where Proverbs is a book of collections. But as the book begins, it really is words of wisdom, most likely from Solomon to one of his sons. And so we see here his appeal to his son that he would receive his words and ultimately seek after wisdom. And that's what we see in verse 1 and 2, making your ear attentive to wisdom, inclining your heart to understanding. It's very interesting that he uses the phrase, yes, if you call out for insight, you raise your voice for understanding. When you think about calling out for something and you think about raising your voice for something, it's with some effort and maybe even some extreme effort and out of maybe some urgency. And so I think that's what that verse is trying to communicate, that this is something that we should be intentional in pursuing. This should be something that we should be some sort of sense of urgency in pursuing wisdom, understanding, insight. And I think about seeking it like we seek for silver, or if you wanted to say like riches, searching for it as if we were searching for hidden treasure. Trying to unbury the hidden treasure and see where is this? What is this? What is this wisdom? Ultimately, that we might understand what the fear of the Lord is and find the knowledge of God, recognizing that the Lord gives wisdom, and from his mouth come knowledge and understanding. That's why we're so serious about Bible study. That's why we're so serious about knowing the words of Scripture, because we believe, like what Paul wrote to Timothy, he says that the Word of God is theopneustos. That's the Greek word for God-breathed. It is the very breath of God being spoken to us. And so we believe that in the words of Scripture is the very words of God himself, which then is something that we want to live by. So we think about that, and we think that the Lord himself gives that wisdom, and from his mouth comes knowledge and understanding. And we can use that wisdom ultimately to walk in integrity, we see in verse 7, and guarding the paths of righteousness, or justice, and ultimately the verse 9, then we will understand the difference between righteousness and unrighteousness, and the difference between justice and injustice. We will understand what is equity and what is every good path. And that is what we want. We want to be able to know what is right. We want to be able to know, I think of many people like, what is the will of the Lord, or what's the right thing to do in this situation, or how do we know? That's what we're looking for, right? We want to know. If we always knew, like, this is the right path. Now, we might not always take it because we're sinful beings, right? We sometimes make mistakes. And choose to live in our selfishness or in something that's wrong. But in a sense, we really do want to know what's right, and sometimes we struggle with that. This passage in Proverbs made me think of another passage, and we haven't done this very often, but I think this is really valuable because I really want you to hear this. In James chapter 1, verse 5, it says, "If any of you lack wisdom, let him ask God, who gives generously to all without reproach, and it will be given to him." And then he talks about if you let him ask in faith and not doubting, because if you're going to doubt that you're going to receive anything from the Lord, you're a double-minded man. But this is a promise. James is writing to us, and he's telling us a promise that if we lack wisdom and we ask God for that wisdom, God will give us that wisdom. And that's very similar to the same thing we're seeing in Proverbs chapter 2. And so I just want to encourage you, if you're lacking wisdom, if you need wisdom in an area, I mean, certainly Proverbs will go on to say, we'll find another place where it says there's, with much counsel there is wisdom, right? And so it's good to seek outside counsel. It's good to seek people who have maybe a different opinion to be able to kind of give you some varying opinions. Wise counsel being the key, not just anyone's opinion. But beyond that, pray to God. Pray and ask for wisdom, because God is faithful, and He's promised that He will give you wisdom if you ask for it. Just ask in faith. So that's what I wanted to share with you today. Hopefully it's been helpful to you. Some great stuff in Proverbs. Looking forward to reading chapter 3 with you all tomorrow. God bless. Have a great rest of your day. Welcome. Happy Wednesday. Different space today, and sorry I missed you all yesterday. Looking forward to reading some scripture with you today. And we're going to be reading in Proverbs chapter 3.
and looking forward to getting into that with you today. A little bit different. If you hear some sound effects going around behind me, it's just probably people over in the school, and I think we're just ending lunch right now. But anyways, so looking at Proverbs chapter 3 today, we're going to be specifically going through the whole text. There's a lot in here. This is where it starts getting a little bit more proverb-y, where we have like a particular proverb, and then there's kind of a lot of different things that are being discussed. So let's start in chapter 3, verse 1. My son, do not forget my teaching, but let your heart keep my commandments. For the length of days and years of life and peace they will add to you. Let not steadfast love and faithfulness forsake you. Bind them around your neck and write them around the tablet of your heart. So you will find favor and good success in the sight of God and man. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all of your ways acknowledge him, and he will make straight your paths. Be not wise in your own eyes, and fear the Lord and turn away from evil. It will be healing for your flesh and refreshment for your bones. Honor the Lord with your wealth and with the firstfruits of all your produce. Then your barns will be filled with plenty, and your vats will be bursting with wine. My son, do not despise the Lord's discipline, or be weary of his reproof, for the Lord reproves those whom he loves, as a father the son in whom he delights. Blessed is the one who finds wisdom, and the one who gets understanding. For the gain from her is better than gain from silver, and her profit is better than gold. She is more precious than jewels, and nothing you can desire can compare with her. Long life is in her right hand, and in her left hand are riches and honor. Her ways are of pleasantness, and all of her paths are of peace. She is a tree of life to those who lay hold of her. Those who hold fast are called blessed. The Lord by wisdom founded the earth, and by understanding he established the heavens. By his knowledge the deeps broke open, and the clouds dropped the dew. My son, do not lose sight of these, and keep sound wisdom and discretion, for they will be the life of your souls, and an adornment for your neck. Then you will walk on your way securely, and your foot will not stumble. And if you lie down, you will not be afraid when you lie down. Your sleep will be sweet. Do not be afraid of sudden terror or the ruin of the wicked when it comes, for the Lord will be your confidence and will keep your foot from being caught. Do not withhold good from those to whom it is due, and when it is in your power to do it. Do not say to your neighbor, go and come again, and tomorrow I will give it, when you have it with you. And do not plan evil against your neighbor who dwells trustingly beside you. Do not contend with a man for no reason when he has done you no harm. And do not envy a man of violence, nor choose any of his ways. For the devious person is an abomination to the Lord, and the upright are in his confidence. The Lord's curse is in the house of the wicked, and he blesses the dwellings of the righteous. Towards the scorners he is scornful, but to the humble he gives favor. And the wise inherit honor, but the fool gets disgrace. Well, there's a lot in Proverbs chapter 3, and a lot we could talk about. Just a couple things just to kind of hit right off the top. A really good section to memorize would be Proverbs 3, 5 through 8. It's a reminder of how we should be, and I think about trust in the Lord with all your heart, lean not on your own understanding, in all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make straight your paths. And I think this particular section, and going into be not wise, but in the sense of that when we acknowledge God in our pathing, and when we acknowledge him and we trust in him in the things that we do, and we put him first, the things that we do, they will be right, because it can't help but be right when we're doing that. Likewise, don't be wise in our own eyes, but fear the Lord and turn away from evil. Sometimes we can think, oh, well, it's fine. And I know that God said that that's not okay, but it's fine. And that goes back to be not wise in your own eyes. Fear the Lord. Turn away from evil. Ultimately, when we do, it's healing to our flesh and it's refreshment to our bones. It has a physical element to it. I think about anxiety, and I think about sometimes how anxiety can just overwhelm us and can just completely destroy us from the inside out. And I think about fearing the Lord, turning away from evil, being not wise in our own eyes, trusting in God, letting him make the paths straight. That can ultimately produce that healing in our flesh and refreshment in our bones. Think about the fact that there's a bunch of different things that are said in here. Obviously, wisdom is something that we should pursue. And that's what part of Proverbs is all about, is pursuing that wisdom, seeking after it, trying to get it. pursuing it like you would pursue silver, pursuing it like you would gold or jewels, because there's nothing that can compare to wisdom. And that's what the writer here is saying, most likely Solomon. Ultimately, long life is in her hands and riches and honor in her hands. This does not mean that if you're wise, you're guaranteed a long life or that you're guaranteed riches, but more likely than not, if you're going to act in wisdom, you're going to have those things, whereas if you act foolishly, you're not. So there's a certain element that it's generically true. This is what we talk about, how Proverbs are generically true. It's not a promise of everything that would be guaranteed. Lots of sections in here talking about, what we should not do, how we don't come against our neighbor. I like how it specifically puts it, do not withhold good. It says in verse 27, do not withhold good from those who it is due when it is in your power to do it. I think that's another good example of, if it's within our power to do good to someone to whom it's due, when we can, let's do it. And I think that's where we should always be seeking about the good of others. That's a clear New Testament teaching, pursuing their good and pursuing the mutual upbuilding. So that's just a couple thoughts from Proverbs chapter 3. Hopefully it was helpful to you. Sorry for the audio in the beginning. I'm going to try to cut it, and maybe you got the cut version. You won't have that issue. But thank you so much for spending some time with me on Wednesday. Look forward to seeing those of you who could make it out tonight to church. We're going to be starting up 2 Peter chapter 1 and looking at the book or letter of 2 Peter, Peter's final letter. Looking forward to doing that with you this evening. And God bless, and look forward to talking to you again real soon. We'll check out Proverbs chapter 4 starting tomorrow.
Glad to be with you today looking at Proverbs chapter 4. We're going to go through this one. It's actually a brief proverb as opposed to yesterday's, so we'll probably have less time in today. But without any further comments or suggestions, we're going to go ahead and take right into Proverbs chapter 4, starting in verse 1. Hear, O sons, a father's instruction, and be attentive that you may gain insight. For I give you good precepts, and do not forsake my teaching. And when I was a son with my father, tender, the only one in the sight of my mother, he taught me and said to me, Let your heart hold fast my words, keep my commandments and live. Get wisdom, get insight, and do not forget, do not turn away from the words of my mouth. Do not forsake her, and she will keep you. Love her, and she will guard you. The beginning of wisdom is this: get wisdom, and whatever you get insight. Prize her highly, and she will exalt you. She will honor you if you embrace her. She will place on your head a graceful garland, and she will bestow on you a beautiful crown. Hear, O son, and accept my words, that the years of your life may be many. I have taught you the way of wisdom, and I have led you into the paths of uprightness. When you walk, your step will not be hampered, and if you run, you will not stumble. Keep hold of instruction, do not let go. Guard her, for she is your life. Do not enter the path of the wicked, and do not walk in the way of evil. Avoid it, do not go in. Turn away from it and pass on. For they cannot sleep unless they have done wrong, and they are robbed of sleep unless they have made someone stumble. For they eat the bread of wickedness and drink the wine of violence. But the path of righteousness is like the light of dawn, which shines brighter and brighter until the full day. The way of the wicked is like deep darkness, and they do not know over what they stumble. My son, be attentive. My son, be attentive to my words. Incline your ear to my sayings. Let them not escape from your sight. Keep them within your heart. For they are life in those who find them, and the healing of all their flesh. Keep your heart with all vigilance, for from it flow the springs of life. Put away all of your crooked speech, and put away devious talk far from you. Let your eyes look directly forward, and your gaze be straight before you. Ponder the path of your feet, and then all your ways will be sure. Do not swerve to the right or to the left, nor turn your foot away from evil. So there's a little bit of discussion here about wisdom. Going back up to the top here, we'll take a look at it. Specifically, we obviously see the father again, which probably is Solomon speaking to either his son, or in this case it says sons. And he's saying to them, I'm going to give you some good precepts, and I've given you good precepts. and don't forsake the teaching. And I think one of the things that kind of is intuitive here is that fathers, and mothers by as well, are to give in good instruction, good precepts, and wisdom along to their children. That is part of what their responsibility is as a parents. That's the role that God has given you in that person's life. So anyways, this person who's writing the proverb, probably Solomon, is saying, hey, when I was a son with my father, and I was the only one in the sight of my mother, he taught me and said, let your heart hold fast my words, keep my commandments, and live. It's very interesting that there's in a sense, there's this command from his father to him saying, this is the way that you're going to live. Um, and the instruction that's right off the bat seems kind of odd. It's get wisdom, get insight. And so I think one of the biggest things that's consistently being shown in the first four Proverbs is that we are to be people who are to pursue wisdom and are to pursue insightfulness. We're to pursue that which is making us wiser and giving us more knowledge and allowing us to apply that knowledge in circumstances. So we're not to be greedily pursuing knowledge for just knowledge's sake, but knowledge in order to be able to apply to an everyday life, in order to be able to live in a wise way. Because wisdom implies more than just knowing what's right, but it's doing what's right as well. And so we see then immediately after verse 5, it starts going into the personification of wisdom again. It says, do not forsake her, referring to wisdom. She will keep you, love her, and she will guard you. If you cling to wisdom and you love wisdom, it's going to guard you. It's going to prevent you from getting into trouble. It's going to keep you from doing things that ultimately are going to pain you in the end. And that is the beginning of wisdom, which you see in verse 7, is get wisdom. That's the beginning. And like we talked about a couple of days ago, in James it talks about God says if you ask for wisdom, that he will give it. And so this goes back to that continued push to get wisdom, seek wisdom, prize wisdom highly. And that in that you will ultimately receive honor, you'll have a better life. Ultimately, things will be safer. And these are generic truths of Proverbs. These aren't things that we can say that if you pursue wisdom and act wise, you're always going to have an easy life. That's not a true statement. But it's generically true that when we're living our life in a wise way, that more often than not, we're not going to get into the trouble that we would get into if we weren't. So hear this as an appeal, a continued appeal that we're going to see throughout the book of Proverbs. Please seek after wisdom, get wisdom. If you don't have wisdom, ask of God that you might find it and that you might receive it. And if you need wisdom, go to others who are of wise counsel and pursue it. I do that frequently. Hey, I've got this situation going on. What do you think? People that I trust to give me wise advice, I go to, and that's advisable. So if you're in a situation today and you're not sure what to do, or you're in a life circumstance and you're not sure what to do, seek wisdom, seek knowledge. All right, I hope that you have a great rest of your Thursday. Looks like the weather's turning out the right way. Hopefully we're going to continue to see warmer and warmer weather. I still have a little bit of snow outside, but I'm looking forward to slowly seeing it go away. And hopefully we continue to see that pattern coming up. And look forward to seeing you again tomorrow when we look at Proverbs chapter 5. Good morning, Grace Community Chapel. Hope you are doing well on this Friday. I know yesterday was St. Patrick's Day, and I didn't say happy St. Patrick's Day. So happy St. Patrick's Day, happy belated St. Patrick's Day. Hopefully you went out and got a shamrock shake and everything that us Americans do to celebrate a historic saint who is actually a pretty cool guy. You definitely should check him out. And maybe that's a little different than the drinking holiday that it ends up being for a lot of other people. But definitely look into St. Patrick. He's a pretty cool guy, and certainly someone who we should uh, learn more about and just reflect on his life. So, anyways, but starting today, we're looking at Proverbs chapter 5, and we're going to be looking at verses 1 through 23, which is the entire section. Looking forward to reading this section with you. It is the warning against adultery. Proverbs chapter 5, starting in verse 1. My son, be attentive to my wisdom and incline your ear to my understanding, that you may keep discretion and your lips may guard knowledge. For the lips of a foreign woman drips honey, and her speech is smoother than oil. But in the end she is bitter as a wormwood, and sharp as a two-edged sword. Her feet go down to death, and her steps follow the path to Sheol. She does not ponder the path of life, and in her ways wander, and she does not know it. And now, O sons, listen to me, and do not depart from the words of my mouth. Keep your way far from her, and do not go near the door of her house, lest you give your honor to others, and your years to the merciless. Lest strangers take their fill of your strength, and your labors go down to the house of a foreigner. At the end of your life you groan, and when your flesh and body are consumed, and you say, How I hated discipline, and how my heart despised reproof. I did not listen to the voice of my teachers, or incline my ear to my instructors. I am at the brink of utter ruin in the assembled congregation. Drink water from your own cistern, and flowing water from your own well. Should your springs be scattered abroad, and springs of water like in the streets? Let them be for yourself alone, and not for strangers with you. Let your fountain be blessed, and rejoice in the wife of your youth, a lovely deer, a graceful doe. Let her breast fill you at all times with delight, and be intoxicated always in her love. Why should you be intoxicated, O my son, with a forbidden woman, and embrace the bosom of an adulteress? For a man's ways are before the eyes of the Lord, and he ponders all of his paths. But that the iniquities of the wicked shall ensnare him, and he is held fast in the cords of his sin. He dies for lack of discipline, and because of his great folly he is led astray. So no uncertain terms being used in this Proverbs. The person who is giving the wisdom to his son, again, we believe it to be Solomon, giving wisdom to one of his sons or to his sons. And very, very clear in what he's saying. And we're not going to go into too much of the explicit detail of what's being shared here. But specifically, there's a huge emphasis on the idea of not following after a path of adultery. And really and truly, I think in a lot of ways, there's ways that we can look at this to more than just adultery itself. Jesus and Matthew and obviously in the Gospels says that even if you look upon a woman with lust in your eyes, that you're committing adultery with her. And so we recognize with between that and the word porneia, which is what a lot of times the Apostle Paul uses for sexual sins, which is really the word we get pornography from. Those things are not to be in the Christian's life. Those things are specifically going to lead you down a path that is a path of destruction. And so looking at this text, for the lips of a forbidden woman drip honey, and her speech is smoother than oil, but in the end. So that we see that there's this enticement. And of course, much like a lot of things, I think in some ways adultery is being personified here as a woman. I don't know necessarily that there's specifically a woman that they're referring to. I've heard some commentators comment about that in the past. There's a particular woman, and he's kind of giving that kind of woman. But I think the idea is more of just like he's personified wisdom, he's also personifying adultery, and that's why specifically they drip honey, speech is smoother. This thing seems really great while you're experiencing it. But afterwards and in the end, you realize that that was actually bitter as wormwood and as sharp as a two-edged sword. And ultimately, it brings about death and destruction, and it will ruin you, is what he's saying to his son. This will ruin you. And if we could say anything to the next generation about pornography, about adultery, about sex before marriage, sex outside of marriage, all of those things, is it can and it will ruin you. In your heart and in your mind and in your body, it will ruin you. It will bring you to the path of destruction. Not that in the sense of that once you've done it, you can't be forgiven, you can't be, and none of that, but in the idea that it really will bring you down to a path of destruction. And so Solomon here says to his sons, keep your way from this woman, the adulteress. Do not go near the door of her house, lest you give your honor and your years to the merciless, and let strangers fill of your strength, and laborers go to the house of a foreigner. And that's what ultimately happens with adultery. And ultimately, people who are stuck in pornography or committing adultery, a large part of the problem is that they hate discipline and they despise reproof. They don't listen to the voice of the instructors. They don't listen to the voice of teachers. People know this stuff is destructive. People know, especially believers, know this stuff will bring you to ruin, but they still find themselves caught into it. So we talk a little bit about loving the wife of your youth, going specifically about being very satisfied with her. This goes back to it's an appropriate thing. Sex is an appropriate thing that God has made. God has made it. He has blessed it in a particular way. And so, perversion is what Satan does. He takes something that's good that God has made and he perverts it and distorts it and makes it into something else. And so let's be fulfilled with that which is pleasant and perfect in what God has designed, and not be fulfilled with stuff that ultimately intoxicates us, but then will bring us about and ensnare us and hold us fast and trap us, and ultimately will bring about, as sin does in all situations, bring about our death. So I hope this has been instructive to you. If you're struggling with something related to sexual sin, pornography, or something like that, please feel free to message us. You're not alone. There are people who struggle with this. There's people who have found victory over it, people who have been able to come out of that lifestyle, and we would love to try to see and get you connected to the help, so that way you can happen. That way it can happen for you. But this is not something you can do on your own. It's not something you can accomplish on your own. You need a community. You need to do it in community. And this isn't something also that's just a problem for guys. In case that's unclear, it's not just a problem for guys. It's a problem for girls too. And there's women who can help. So please reach out. Let us know how we can help you. Certainly, remember that sin ultimately brings about death. That's what sin brings. So don't get caught in sin. Find the new life. Be a new creation. Act in the life that God has given you and find the freedom that's in Christ alone. May God bless your Friday. Have a great weekend. Looking forward to seeing you all this coming Sunday. And be glad to be with you then. Bye. Good afternoon, Grace Community Chapel. Hope you are all doing well on this Monday. Getting ready to start with Proverbs chapter 6 and reading that entire chapter today. Look forward to doing the book of Proverbs with you this week. Hopefully we're going to get through chapters 6 through 11, assuming something doesn't come up and I can't do a day, but looking forward to doing that with you. It was great to be with many of you this last weekend. I know I missed some of you, but looking forward to seeing you again, either on Wednesday night this week or again next Sunday. But yeah, so let's take a look at Proverbs chapter 6, and we're going to be starting in verse 1. And here is Proverbs chapter 6, verse 1. My son, if you have put up security for your neighbor and have given your pledge for a stranger, if you were snared in the words of your mouth, caught in the words of your mouth, then do this, my son, and save yourself, for you have come into the hand of your neighbor. Go hasten, plead urgently with your neighbor. Give your eyes no sleep, and your eyelids no slumber. Save yourself like a gazelle from the hand of a hunter, like a bird from the hand of a fowler. Go to the ant, thou sluggard, and consider her ways and be wise. Without having any chief, officer, or ruler, she prepares her bread in the summer and gathers her food in harvest. How long will you lie there, O sluggard? When will you arise from your sleep? A little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to rest, and poverty will come upon you like a robber, and a want like an armed man. A worthless person, a wicked man, goes about with crooked speech, winks with his eyes and signals with his feet, points with his finger, and with a perverted heart devises evil, continually sowing discord. Therefore calamity will come upon him suddenly. In a moment he will be broken beyond healing. There are 6 things that the Lord hates, 7 that are an abomination to him: haughty eyes, a lying tongue, hands that shed innocent blood, a heart that devises wicked plans, feet that make haste to run to evil, a false witness who breathes out lies, and one who sows discord among brothers. My son, keep your father's commandment, and forsake not your mother's teaching. Bind them on your heart always, and tie them around your neck. When you walk, they will lead you, and when you lie down, they will watch over you, and when you awake, they will talk with you. For the commandment is a lamp, and teaching a light, and reproofs of discipline are the way of life, to preserve you from the evil woman, from the smooth tongue of the adulteress. Do not desire her beauty in your heart, and do not let her capture you with her eyelashes. For the price of the prostitute is only a loaf of bread, but a married woman hunts down a precious life. Can a married carry fire next to his chest, and his clothes not be burned? Or can one walk on hot coals, and his feet not be scorched? So is he who goes in to his neighbor's wife. None who touch her will go unpunished. People do not despise a thief if he steals to satisfy his appetite when he is hungry, but if he is caught, he will pay sevenfold, and he will give all the goods of his house. He who commits adultery lacks sense. He who does it destroys himself. He will get the wounds and dishonors, and his disgrace will not be wiped away. For jealousy makes a man furious, and he will not spare when he takes revenge. He will accept no compensation. He will refuse though you multiply gifts. Well, a lot here specifically in talking about adulterous relationship and what happens when caught in an adulterous relationship, or when you follow through. And so certainly, I mean, just hitting the end of this text right here, I mean, this is clear. He who commits adultery lacks sense. He who does it destroys himself. The Bible is clear that when we commit sin, especially sins like the sin of adultery, although yes, we are sinning against, in a case of a man and a woman, we're submitting against the man's committing adultery against her. He's committing a sin against her. He's committing a sin against the Lord, and ultimately he's committing a sin against the husband. And same thing with the wife. She's committing, or a woman, she's committing a sin against the other woman, the husband, and of course God. And so we've got to be thinking about, as we look at sins, what does sin do? The outpouring of that is death. And that's why the psalmist ultimately says the person who commits adultery lacks sense, because it will destroy, and ultimately it will destroy himself. It's interesting that when he's talking about this adultery, he talks about people don't despise a thief if he steals to satisfy his appetite, and he says that specifically right after he's talking about adultery. And sometimes, people say, well, I just have a heavy appetite, and it's like that's not what this is talking about. Specifically, when we're looking here, uh, there's a transition, right? So sometimes Proverbs is talking about one thing, then it talks about something else, then it goes back. So really and truly, verse 30 is true, though. When we hear about someone who's stealing food, it's a little less of a concern for us. We're like, oh, that's a shame. However, it doesn't change the fact that if he's caught, he ultimately still has to pay for what he stole. And so, ultimately, it's the same thing when we're looking in relationships, when we're looking in any sort of sin, restoration, any sort of restoration. Oftentimes, it's going to be higher because you can't undo what you've done. And so that's what a lot of what this is talking about in here. Obviously, in referring to committing adultery, again, verse 27 refers to it as carrying a fire next to his chest, but yet not getting his clothes burned. And so we talked a little bit about the adultery element on Friday. But let's go back a little bit here. Sometimes the headings mislead us, right? And so the heading says warnings against adultery in verse 20. Looking at it here, that's not what this section is first about. This first is about keeping commandments generally and not forsaking his mother's teaching. So what does he say to do? He says those commandments, and it's not just one commandment, there's a bunch of them. But he's to bind them, that's why there's more than one, on your heart always and tie them around your neck. That's the idea of keeping them close to you. And that when you walk, they will lead you. They will be in front of you. When you lie down, they will be with you. When you awake, they will talk with you. It's the idea of something that's always right there with you. And he describes then the commandments as like a lamp and a teaching light, and reproofs of discipline are a way of life. I think sometimes we don't necessarily think that way. And we need to. We need to start thinking about, the commandments of the Lord, especially the teachings of the law and the teachings of Scripture. Those are things that are to be used as a lamp, as a light, and to preserve us ultimately and keep us in discipline. And we need to think about knowing those things and reading those things and keeping those things with us as a way of life. So that way it's going to expose the evil ways of darkness, and we're not going to choose to walk in them because we're going to be walking in the commandments. We're going to be listening and reading the commandments. So we're going to want to obey God. So there was a bunch of other stuff. The common go to the ant thou sluggard, talking about people who, we need to be making sure that we are consistently hardworking. And this isn't the hardworking work 16-hour days and pull yourself up by your bootstraps. That's not what this is talking about. This is talking about doing wages and working hard in order to provide for your family and to provide for yourself. And that ultimately, anyone who is not going to provide for themselves is like the worthless person who winks with his eyes, signals with his feet, basically tries to get whatever he can get through sowing discord and calamity. Last thing I wanted to kind of point out here, and this is something very interesting. Verses 16 through 19 talks about things that God hates and that are an abomination to Him. And these verses are just very helpful to me. Haughty eyes, prideful eyes. Looking at yourself in a way, or looking at others in a way that's not true. A lying tongue, someone who's being deceptive in what they're saying to others. Hands that shed innocent blood. A heart that devises wicked plans. Man, sometimes my heart devises wicked plans. Feet that make haste to run to evil. That's where something's wrong, and rather than trying to divert yourself away from it, you head right straight towards it. A false witness who breathes out lies. That's mentioned twice. But a false witness is where now not only are you just lying and deceiving people, you're actually doing so to bear witness about somebody else in a way that's false to cause them harm. And then the last one, the one who sows discord among brothers. So those are 6 things the Lord hates, 7 that are an abomination to Him. We should be considering those things and really evaluating ourselves. Are there times where I've had haughty eyes or prideful eyes, where I've looked at others in a way that's looking at me in a different way than them, and not evaluating the way that God would evaluate them? Am I do I lie? Do I say things that are not true? Regardless of the reason, do I say things that are not true? Hands that shed innocent blood. That's the idea of that you're out to pursue yourself. Certainly, there's an element of murder or killing someone there, but even beyond that, where you're more concerned with what you want and you have rather than somebody else, and you're willing to take their life to that end. False witness who bears out lies, heart that devises wicked plans, and feet who make haste to run to evil. All of these things we should be evaluating. And then within the assembly of God, within those who are called to be believers and Christians and who are meeting together in the churches, are we one who sows discord among the brothers? That's a real serious issue. So those are some words from Proverbs. Hopefully they've been helpful to you. And certainly things that I've been meditating on a little bit today, and was glad to be able to share them with you. Hopefully you guys have gotten some stuff. Feel free to leave a comment if there's a particular proverb in here that said something to you. And look forward to dealing with Proverbs again tomorrow. Take care. God bless.
Good afternoon, Grace Community Chapel family. Hope you're all doing well on Tuesday. Coming at you a little bit later in the day. Apologize. It was kind of a busy day. But looking at Proverbs chapter 7 today. So we're going to go ahead and get right into reading. We're continuing in Solomon's discussion with his son, warning against adulterous woman. That's specifically what he's going to be talking about. So we're going to continue that thought in Proverbs chapter 7, starting in verse 1. It says, "My son, keep my words and treasure up my commandments with you. Keep my commandments and live. Keep my teaching as the apple of your eye. Bind them on your fingers and write them on the tablet of your heart. Say to wisdom, you are my sister, and call insight your intimate friend, to keep you from the forbidden woman, from the adulteress with her smooth words. For at the window of my house I have looked through my lattice, and I have seen among the simple, I have perceived these among the youths, a young man lacking sense, passing along the street near her corner, and taking the road to her house, in the twilight and in the evening, at the time of night and darkness. And behold, the woman meets him, dressed as a prostitute, wily of heart. She is loud and wayward, and her feet do not stay at home. Now in the street, now in the market, and at the corner she lies in wait. She seizes him and kisses him, and with bold face says to him, I had to offer sacrifices, and today I had to pay my vows. So now I have come out to meet you, to seek you eagerly, and I have found you. I have spread my couch with coverings, and covered linens with from Egyptian linen, and I have perfumed my bed with myrrh and aloes and cinnamon. Come, let us take our fill of love till morning. Let us delight ourselves with love. For my husband is not at home. He has gone on a long journey. He took a bag of money with him, and at full moon he will come home. With much seductive speech she persuades him, and with her smooth talk she compels him. At once he follows her, and like an ox goes to the slaughter, or like a stag is caught fast, till an arrow pierces its liver, and his bird rushes into the snare. He does not know it will cost him his life. And now, O sons, listen to me, and be attentive to my words of my mouth, and let not your heart turn aside to her ways. Do not stray into her paths. For many a victim she has laid low, and all of her slain a mighty throng. Her house is the way to Sheol, and a going down to the chambers of death. So there's a lot we could be talking about in terms of the adulterous woman and what Solomon probably in this proverb is referring to and talking to his son. But a couple of things I want to focus on. We could talk about specifically the adulterous woman and what she's described as, and we could look into that. And I don't think this is necessarily calling out any particular one woman. I don't know. It appears that this is something he's witnessed over a period of time. But one thing I will say that is important to notice, he comes back in the very beginning, and he's teaching it again, and the focus is keep my commandments and live. And keep my teaching as the apple of your eye. Bind them upon your fingers and write them on the tablet of your heart. The idea is to keep the commandments, specifically the ones that Solomon has given, which is the commandments of the Lord, close to us. The insinuation from that proverb is that if you keep the words close, you're not going to stray and you're not going to go into something you shouldn't, because you're going to see it and you're going to know that it's wrong. And that's why he says in verse 4, say to wisdom, you are my sister, and call insight your intimate friend. The idea is that insight, wisdom, and the commandments will keep you from doing that which you should not do, because it will remind you. Now, it's interesting that when Paul talks about the law, talks about the commandments, says it gave us the knowledge of what to do, but ultimately caused us to go against it, because we didn't have the willingness to do what the law has commanded us to do. And that's why the gospel is so important, because the gospel is what empowers us to do what the law commands, because in our flesh, we wouldn't have done it. That's really important. So that's one element. But we should know the commandments. We should know what is right and what is wrong. And so, one of the reasons why we study the scriptures is to know what is approved, what is right, what God calls good. Because if we leave it to our own devices, we end up calling things that are not good, because we don't think like God thinks. So that's the first thing. Second thing I want to kind of point out as we're looking down through here, and I'm going to scroll down a little bit further towards the end. We see the interaction of the woman, right? And then we see in verse 24, or sorry, in verse 22, we see that ultimately sin brings about destruction. It brings about death. And this is in a generic sense. We know that from other passages of Scripture that all sin ultimately leads to death. Some have the path much faster, but all sin leads to death. And not just spiritual death. We're talking about physical death or disastrous consequences, destruction. So, but you'll notice that it doesn't seem like that. In all the circumstances that was given in verses 22 and 23, very much like the seductive speech and the smooth talk, the sin oftentimes compels us. It says, oh, it's okay, it's fine, it's okay, it's good, it looks great, it looks enticing, right? And we follow after it, but really its end is death. And that's what Solomon says specifically about the adulterous woman. And then he says, sons, listen to me. Be attentive to these words of my mouth. Don't turn your heart aside to her ways. Do not stray unto her paths. For many a victim has she laid low, and her slain are a mighty throng. Her house is the way to Sheol, going down to the chambers of death. And beloved friends, members of Grace Community Chapel, if you're in the community of West Gardner and Gardner, I would compel you, the way of sin ultimately leads to death, and not just adultery, but all sin. And we must be compelled to not stray down those paths. It will only cause harm. It will only cause hurt. Let's seek what is right. Let's do the right thing, because it's going to ultimately produce better fruit, better life. Again, not perfect, general rule. But anyways, so that's our wisdom for a Tuesday, looking at Proverbs chapter 7. Looking forward to looking at Proverbs chapter 8 tomorrow on Wednesday. And God bless. Hope you have all a great evening, and talk to you later.